We're excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast and study of the Doctrine and Covenants, hosted by Rod Meldrum and Jonathan Neville, and presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. In today's podcast, we will study Doctrine and Covenants 12 and 13, Joseph Smith History 1, 66 through 75. Upon you, my fellow servants.
Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have Hannah started with us today for our Come Follow Me. This is going to be lesson number 7, and this is talking about Doctrine and Covenants sections 12 and 13, and also Joseph Smith History, the very kind of end of it. Mm-hmm. And we have, if you don't know who Hannah Stoddard is at this point in time, you need to get to know Hannah Stoddard because she is amazing and one of the most intelligent youth of the church, basically, I would say, but she's not really a youth now. Although, but
I guess I'm getting old.
She's getting older.
Thank you.
Well, it's like I always say, the older I get, the better I was. So
I guess I represent the millennials. He represents
millennials and so forth. But Hannah has been very much involved in apologetics, basically, of the church. When I say apologetics, meaning not we're apologizing, but actually providing answers for people. Mm-hmm. And some of the research that they have done has actually been just really phenomenal research. And especially, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these things like the seer stone versus the Urim and Thummim, and they actually have written an entire book about it, which is fantastic. So, but I wanted to start off today, Hannah, with a little bit of a brief background as far as what's happening here in these couple of sections here in sections 12 and 13. Mm-hmm. So essentially, Joseph and Emma have made their way down to here in Harmony, and they've been just going through the winter time, and things have just been really kind of ugly. I mean, they are poor, starving students, if you will.
I'd say this is probably one of the most difficult times because this is after Joseph Smith lost the 116 pages. So Martin's not really in the picture anymore. He has no one to really help scribe for him to actually get the job done. Yeah. And he is literally at the end of his rope. So
he's he's crying out for.
He is.
He has this heavy responsibility, this weight on his shoulders that he is supposed to continue to carry out this, but he's basically got no means to do it. Right. The Lord, what am I supposed to do? There's nothing I can do here. Right. I'm kind of dead in the water.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, this individual shows up, Oliver Cowdery. It's on verse 66 on the Joseph Smith History. Verse 66 is on the 5th day of April. This is early in April. Yes. 1829, Oliver Cowdery came to my house. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to note that Joseph Smith didn't even know who he was.
Yes.
But why was Oliver there?
Yes. So also I want to add, Joseph Smith is only 23 at this point, and Oliver Cowdery is 22. So I just want everyone watching, maybe you're a young person that age. Yes. No, they're the next generation's down, right? Yeah. So they're literally their kids. Right? So I want everyone that's watching just a picture, what were you doing at 23? Here's Joseph Smith literally trying to take on one of the greatest works of Scripture to come forth. And he's doing this as a 23-year-old on his own, penniless, no job, no funding, almost no support.
And in fact, his in-laws basically are threatening to kick him out.
Right. So that's what's going on right now.
If he doesn't get going on with something else, and so forth. Now it's April, so it's basically planting season. So so now all this work is about to start to happen, and Joseph Smith is not planning on doing all the planting and stuff. I mean, he's trying to figure out what he's thing to do.
Yes. Yeah. So this is actually from our book, The Seer Stone, the Urim and Thummim, and in chapter 8, we actually talk about the story of Oliver Cowdery. We have the account. Awesome. And so it's really, so Oliver Cowdery was a school teacher up with Joseph Smith Sr., so that's Joseph Smith's parents.
He was actually living with Joseph Smith's parents.
Right. And he starts hearing all these
in their
stories. So he's the school teacher. So it's kind of like the custom back then that the school teacher would stay with families that were sending their kids to school. Because
they were also penniless. He's basically had no money either.
Oliver. Yeah. So he's just this young, he's 22. He starts hearing these stories about these gold plates, right?
His vision.
And I want you just to, they always say lies spread faster than truth, right? And so the stories going around were not promotional,
or accurate.
So he's like hearing these stories. So he starts asking Joseph Smith's parents, like, what's the deal here? And they're really, really hesitant. And so finally they start talking to him, and he actually prays, and we have this account all in our book. But basically what happens in a nutshell is the Lord actually sends an angel to Oliver Cowdery in a vision, shows him the plates, and then he talks to him.
Wait, so Joseph Smith wasn't. Oliver
Right.
Cowdery didn't see the plates first from Joseph Smith. He actually saw the plates first
beforehand.
in vision.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is right from Joseph Smith. This is in his 1832 account of the first
this
vision.
Is awesome.
He says, the Lord appeared unto a young man by the name of Oliver Cowdery, and shewed unto him the plates in a vision, and also the truth of the work and what the Lord was about to do through me, his unworthy servant. Therefore, he was desirous to come and write for me. So basically what happens is he has this vision, he's shown the plates, and the Lord's like, you need to go and help translate it for him. So this is during the winter. It's impossible for him to get to where Joseph Smith is. But the minute the weather starts letting up at all, he drags Samuel Smith down with him. And it talks about, and again, this account is in our book for those that want the full story.
Mud and
Yep, the roads are impassable. It was freezing weather. It was wind, and they get their way down to Harmony, and they knock on the door. Joseph Smith had been crying for 3 days right before Oliver Cowdery shows up, and he's just begging the Lord. He's like, Emma's family's going to turn me out of doors. I'm going to be homeless. I'm going to be penniless. I've given everything to do this, and I can't do this. This is it, how are we going to translate this record? And a knock comes at the door, and a 22-year-old young man is standing there, and he's like, I'm here to write for you.
Tell me the rest of the story.
Imagine Joseph Smith's feelings, like how exciting. Yep. It was only days later. They went to work.
They were going after.
They went to work, and this is 1829, and it's only a year from then is when the church is organized. So they got the record translated. They got it published. If
you think about it, I mean, it's kind of like 2 millennials, really, just with this amazing mandate from God. Mm-hmm. To basically to get this history, this ancient history of America, and get it out there.
Yes, and we're going to talk about a little bit later. Like, was Joseph Smith just lucky? Was he just did he win the lottery, or like why was he so special? But we won't get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. So in verse 68, he basically comes and he says that he continued the work of translation until May. This is ensuing in May of 1829. Then they went into the woods to pray, and of course we know that the main lesson, if you've already and by the way, I want to reiterate the fact that we are assuming that you've already gone through the main lesson and the manual and so forth, and have gone through all of that. So this is, in addition, this is supplemental kind of material for those who want to go a little bit deeper into some of the history and things like that. We know that there was a special messenger that came to the two of them,
John the Baptist,
and that then they were baptized and so forth. So we kind of cover all that there in that one sentence.
Yes.
There, basically.
No, it's really significant because you have John the Baptist, and he comes. So we know that all of the dispensation heads, and even others, everyone who had keys in the history of the world came to Joseph Smith at some point in time to give him the keys. Yeah. I just want to think about that for a second. So, Joseph Smith was always, we read about Paul, we read about Moses, we read about Adam. Okay, Joseph Smith didn't read about them. He knew them.
He met them.
He talked to them face to face. And he would talk a lot of times in his sermons. He'd get up and be like, well, Paul kind of had a whiny, higher voice. and this is what Seth looked like. And he'd tell people like, oh, you look like Seth. And like, that's who Joseph Smith is.
He actually saw them. He met with them.
Right. That's who his associates were. Those were the men that he talked and he worked with. And I want you to think, no other prophet in the history of the earth had this happen, where they had all the other prophets come to him and give Joseph Smith their keys, so Joseph Smith can do his work. In fact, that is huge.
Probably the only next time that's going to happen is at the big meeting at Adamonte Ammon, when all of the keys of the priesthood goes all the way up to to the Ancient of Days.
Right. So you've got everything kind of culminating with Joseph Smith, who's number 2, and leading up to trying to bring forth the marvelous work and wonder. And this is something that's really fascinating, and this is in one of our videos. Do Yes, we do. We have it here. This is Rod's stack, so I'm borrowing. But in one of our videos, the Unlocking the Mystery of the Two Prophets, we have this quote from Heber C. Kimball where he actually talks about, he said, of the 7 dispensations, he said, this last is the greatest. And he said it's not only, Joseph Smith is not only having a work to do in this dispensation, but it's actually his job, he said, to rise up and confer power on all of the others. Now, okay, I think this is something that way surpasses what this means, surpasses my knowledge. But basically what he's saying is we don't have just a work in this dispensation. He has a work in all the other dispensations, and it's greater than, this is greater than Adam.
Similar to Christ. I mean, Christ came in the meridian of time, and then Joseph Smith comes in the end of times, basically to kind of wrap up the whole thing that Christ got.
Yes.
Started in the middle of it.
And Heber C. Kimball, he talks about, he's like, this is how significant Joseph Smith's work is. This is what we have got to do. And I love, this is Heber C. Kimball. He goes, he's like, why don't you realize it? Like, right, because you're sitting there and like, wow, this is huge. Like, this is not just about Joseph Smith's work. Like, we know in our day, but it's, he has to help Moses do his work. Moses cannot do his work without Joseph Smith's help. Adam cannot do his work without Joseph Smith's help. That's what he's saying. Wow. He has power.
He's pivotal to this whole thing.
To the whole history of the earth. And so you're sitting there mind blown, and Heber C. Kimball's like, why do you not realize this? This is word for word. Heber C. Kimball goes, why do you not realize this? He said, you could if you lived your religion and called upon God by day and by night. Anyway, so the full story is in our Two Prophets documentary, but so Heber C. Kimball's like, this is what is going on. This is such a bigger picture, and I think sometimes it's so easily just to be like, oh, cool. Okay, move on.
Just kind of this ignorant farm boy, kind of just kind of stumbled into this whole thing, and
and we're going to talk about that for sure.
So he says, let's see. One thing I think is interesting. So we know the date of when they were baptized and so forth, received the Aaronic priesthood. We don't know the exact date of when they received the Melchizedek priesthood, which is an interesting thing. They didn't really record that, apparently.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of history. We won't get into the whole priesthood discussion, though. That's a big
but I want to reiterate, and I know probably all of you have heard this already, but basically the words of Oliver Cowdery here, I think, are just so apropos. And it's actually right there in the very end of the Joseph Smith history. Oliver Cowdery described these events thus. He says, quote, "These were days never to be forgotten, to sit under the sound of a voice dictated by the Spirit, the inspiration of heaven, awakened the utmost gratitude of this bosom. Day after day I continued, uninterrupted, to write from his mouth, as he translated with the Urim and Thummim, or as the Nephites would have said, interpreters, the history or record called the Book of Mormon." And I want to just do a little. This is a little information thing about the seer stone versus Urim and Thummim. If you've been watching these podcasts, you already know that we talked about in some detail about the idea of where this idea that the Book of Mormon translation happened with a seer stone instead of with the instrument that God had prepared in advance, like 2,000 years in advance, for the purpose of translating the book, and how that has been. Kind of shanghaied, actually, with this new idea that Joseph Smith, in fact, ignored the Urim and Thummim and the plates and just basically read it off of a stone that was placed in a hat, and that's been kind of a new narrative. And I want you to talk about this because you're one of the experts about this whole thing.
So there is absolutely zero credible sources to support the idea that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon using a seer stone. Now, with that said,
when you say credible sources, that means
a source that is credible that we would.
They weren't flip-flopping and so forth.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and with that said, I have to clarify. Yes, Joseph Smith had seer stones. The progressives just love to run off and be like, "Oh, the Stoddards don't believe Joseph Smith had a seer stone." We know he had a seer stone. But what we're talking about is the translation of the Book of Mormon. And we're also talking about if Joseph Smith had a career in money digging and magic, and then used this occultic seer stone to translate
black
the Book of Mormon.
Magic and things.
Absolutely not. There's no credible sources. I've debated with so many progressives online and whatever, and they cannot come up with one source. So, and that's why we wrote the book. And this is part 1. We're working on part 2. The research is all done. It's just so many projects.
You can pick it up on the website, basically, in the bookstore and so forth. You can pick up copies there, and it really is a pretty phenomenal.
In a nutshell, every claim that Joseph Smith used the seer stone to translate comes from apostate sources.
Just so you know, this is my personal copy, and you just take a look at the how much yellow stuff there is in there. It's all the way through this whole thing. Anyway,
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was a mind blowing experience. I mean, basically. There's been a huge blessing with the memoirs of a particular church historian, who will be named shortly. We'll
talk about that a little bit later.
But his memoirs came out with absolutely
his diaries,
really damning information about his personal views on the church and their desire to change the early history of the church.
Right, just kind of revealing their worldview and how different it is and why they want to change the history. And of course, if you're a progressive, then you're going to be cheering them on. Yeah. That's great. That's cool. If you're a traditionalist, then you're going to see it a little bit differently. And
so when we say progressive and conservative, basically, the way I kind of see that is basically conservative comes from the conserve, which is basically to maintain or to hold on to. That kind of thing. And progressive, basically, I think, can be understood in many different ways, but the way that we're kind of expressing it is that basically those who want to change from what was the original to something different.
Right. If you think about it this way, so like a traditionalist says, okay, Joseph Smith established this foundation. He established this restoration. He brought forth the scripture. Those revelations really are revelations from God. The Book of Mormon is the record, a historical record of there really was a Nephi, there really was a Mormon. The Doctrine and Covenants really is revelation from God. And Joseph Smith was righteous, and he brought forth this foundation, and our job is to continue and help that get out to the world. A progressive viewpoint.
Embrace and uphold that idea, yes.
Right. So a progressive viewpoint instead says, okay, well, Joseph Smith kind of got this started, but as I heard it described recently, and it's really good, is kind of this idea there were all these just stones everywhere, and Joseph Smith is like, let's build a church. I like this stone, and I like this stone, and a lot of it is baggage from his culture. A lot of it is just his ideas. Some of it maybe is genius, some maybe a little inspiration, however you define inspiration, and kind of puts this together, and that was nice. That was a good start, but we have so much more light and knowledge now, and we have progressed, and we need to move beyond that and really kind of usher Joseph Smith's work and kind of like take what was nice and then just kind of brush him under the rug and move forward. So it's a very different approach to the gospel. It's a very different approach to scripture, and
kind of build upon it. And basically, my personal approach, and I think, and I know is yours, is that basically, if Joseph Smith was who he purports to be, and who many others have testified he is and was basically, then it's kind of like improving on the things that he had revelations about could be somewhat problematic. Although that's what the church is, a dynamic church. Then the gospel, God does not, he doesn't alter,
right,
and so forth. But the church does actually, move forward, and it changes policies and those kinds of things. But the doctrines of the church basically are eternal.
Yes, and this idea that this foundation that Joseph Smith started. Do we want to go into this? Do we want to start into D&C 12?
Yes, let's go into this.
Okay, let's go into this.
Okay, we're going to move into Doctrine and Covenants, 12. Section 12.
Yes.
And again, this is set in Harmony, Pennsylvania. This is Revelation to Joseph Knight. And now Joseph Knight actually played an interesting role in this too, because he was a fairly wealthy individual, and he actually helped Joseph Smith out financially a few times.
Yes.
Kind of helped him get through some of this stuff. Great friend. In fact, Joseph Smith was so poor when he got the plates. When he originally got the gold plates, he had to borrow his wagon, because he didn't even own his own wagon. He was 22 years old at that point in time and didn't have his own wagon yet. And so he had to borrow that just to go and get the plates.
Yes. Joseph Smith made incredible sacrifices. None of us can even comprehend, what really went into this. But section 12, and I think sometimes we read over some of these sections, kind of like, okay, the Lord's just saying the same thing over and over. Like,
yeah, I think 6 or 7 of these
right. Like maybe we should just
start off the
one
same way.
So instead of thinking like, okay, well, like, why didn't he just put one version in and file the rest? Because there's lots of revelations that didn't make their way into our Doctrine and Covenants. There's lots. So why is this so significant? So in preparation for this, I was reading it, and I was telling Rod before we got started on this, I was like, I am so charged, and I'm so excited about this. So I promised him I would try to contain some of my excitement and not get too animated.
You don't have to contain your excitement. Just go ahead. Just let it out.
Okay, so section 12, he starts off and he goes, a great and a marvelous work is about to come forth among the children of men. I think we've all heard this before, right? We've there's even songs about it. So what is this great and marvelous work? So I wanted to actually just read a quote that's actually from Joseph Smith's Patriarchal Blessing. A lot of people don't know you can actually go read Joseph Smith's Patriarchal Blessing. And a lot of people don't know.
Given to him by his father.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know there's actually other blessings that were given to him by Oliver Cowdery and others. And you can actually read all of those on our website. And they are so fun.
Tell them the website.
Yes, it's ldsanswers.org, or you can go to josephsmithfoundation.org. But LDS Answers is the one that has specifically those documents. And so in Joseph Smith's Patriarchal Blessing, the Lord actually identifies Joseph Smith as the man who's going to bring forward the marvelous work and a wonder, which is significant because that's a term that's found in Scripture. It's not just something Joseph Smith made up or the Lord happened to throw in right now. This is a term that prophets were using for millennia. Yep.
Previous.
So the Lord tells Joseph Smith in his Patriarchal Blessing, he says, thou hast been called even in thy youth to do the great work of the Lord. Not a great work of the Lord, the great work. To do a work in this generation which no man would do as thyself. Which I think is a pretty good big deal. If we think about it, that means no one could do what Joseph Smith was able to do. Which makes sense when you think about him. He's 23 years old and he's translating the Book of Mormon. That's a greater work than I think any of us are going to do in our lifetime. And he's doing it at 23 years old. Right. That's a pretty big deal.
I think that's why they say second to only to Jesus Christ himself is it comes Joseph Smith and his importance in God's plan.
Right. Yes, that's testified by so many presidents of the church. So the Lord says, in all things according to the will of the Lord, a marvelous work and a wonder has the Lord wrought by thy hand. And then he says, this is what's going to bring in the remnants of Israel. This is what's going to gather the lost tribes, and everything is going to be Joseph Smith's work. Oliver Cowdery said the same thing. Oliver Cowdery said that when the angel Moroni came to Joseph Smith, angel Moroni actually told Joseph Smith, he said, you are going to bring to pass the marvelous work and a wonder. So we're like, okay, so we identify, okay, it's Joseph Smith doing this. Joseph Smith made a really interesting statement in Nauvoo, and it was published in the Times and Seasons. He said that the building up of Zion is a cause that has interested the people of God in every age. So I want you to think about this. Think of your favorite Bible story, okay? Think of Daniel, Esther, Samuel, Joshua, whatever it is. Every single one of those people were thinking about the building of Zion in the last days. It's kind of a big deal. And Joseph Smith says, it is a theme upon which prophets, priests, and kings have dwelt with peculiar delight. They have looked forward with joyful anticipation to the day in which we live. Now, this is key. Again, we live, that's Joseph Smith's day. So he's basically saying, all of the prophets were talking about me. So this is where some of our non-member friends. I can imagine
for a young, farm boy, basically from Western New York, this was quite a shock to him himself as he was reading these things, even in the Book of Mormon, and his name comes up in the ancient text off of the gold plates.
Yes, I don't know how much he already knew from the first vision, or like all those conversations.
So maybe he was kind of expected it by the time the translation was happening.
But it definitely was a confirmation, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But this is where a lot of our non-member friends they read some of these quotes from Joseph Smith where he's like, all of those prophets were talking about me. They were talking about my work. They were talking about what I'm doing, and they're like, that guy is so arrogant.
Such an egotistical guy.
Are you kidding me? Like, what does this 30-year-old kid think he's out there doing? like, what do you think who does he think he is? So we have to ask ourselves, like, okay, so why is Joseph Smith saying everybody was talking about me? He said they were writing about it, they were singing about it, they were prophesying about him. So why, this is a huge, huge deal. Why is it such a big deal? Why in all of these sections in the Doctrine and Covenants where the Lord's talking to Joseph Smith Sr. or Hiram or anything, and he starts, a great and marvelous work is about to come forth. This is time. We're about to do it. So I was telling Rod a little bit about this. So those that are familiar with us, they know that we've done documentaries with the Joseph Smith Foundation, and then we did the recent Faith Crisis books. And
maybe for those of you who are not already familiar with that, this is the Faith Crisis. This is the first. This is one of the first edition. This is the second edition. It has a little bit different cover on it, and
same content inside.
Yeah, we were not betrayed, basically. And again, this is another one of these. You see the yellowing and everything. Absolutely stunning. I mean, the information research basically builds upon the Searstone book and takes it. But so why did you? I want to take a little departure for just a second. But why Faith Crisis? What's the significance of the title?
So, and I'm going to answer this also throughout as we're talking here. But basically, some people know. I think almost everyone probably by now that's even watching this has a loved one or a family member or a friend who's struggling with their testimony or has left the church. The latest statistics, but these were years ago, so it's probably even worse now, is that we're losing over 75% of millennials in the church. Like, they're leaving. We're losing them. That doesn't count the succeeding generations. That doesn't count those older than millennials. That's just millennials. All of our statistics, it's crazy. We're having one of the biggest faith crises in the church, and people are trying to figure out why. People are losing their kids, and they're like, why? I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from people, and they're like, my son was a returned missionary. Yep. My husband was a mission president, and they just told me that they're leaving the church, and I don't understand why, and I don't know how to answer their questions. And a lot of them are saying they're leaving because they feel betrayed over the history. So over so many years, and we're talking to people at expos, and we get done with conferences or presentations, and we can't even get to the bathroom because there's so many people. And it's so sad because they're literally bawling their eyes out, and they're crying like, what do I do? Help me. Please, can you talk to my son? Can you talk to my daughter? Can you? And so we were like, we need to tell people we were not betrayed. Because people are feeling like there's this new version of church history that's coming out, and it talks about Joseph Smith. So
that's the betrayal you're talking about. It's just basically church history changing from what I was taught growing up. Mm-hmm. And as a prime example, I mean, everything I was ever taught growing up in seminary and institute and so forth. And
that's a great example.
Was talking about how the translation was done using this special instrument that got it prepared 2,000 years in advance.
And he was using the plates, and they were on the table.
And all that kind of stuff. So he was actually doing a translation. He had to read the characters off of the plates and then translate them in his mind and then give that over to Oliver Cowdery to write down, or whoever his scribe was at the time. Right. And that was a narrative that I heard growing up. And now all of a sudden there's this new narrative about that he had a hat instead and he stuck his head in there and so forth.
Right. And then people are like, Rough Stone Rolling comes out by Richard Bushman, and they're like, oh, actually, Joseph Smith was out digging treasure with the neighbors, and he was the village seer, and people came to him to find their lost objects, and like all these stories, and they're like, whoa, this is not the Joseph Smith that I was singing praise to the man to, and like, this is not the Joseph Smith I watched in the movies, like, what's going on, right? Yeah. And so there's this, so that's
part of this faith crisis that we're talking about. This is what's causing it. Just as a just as an aside here, typically when people want to change a society, change a culture, one of the first things they do is they change the history. That's true from whether it's the Egyptians, and each succeeding pharaoh would go and have the previous pharaoh's name carved out of, chiseled out of all the monuments and so forth, and had their name to it, and so forth. But the changing of the culture requires a changing of the history. That's the reason why the American history has been under such attack.
Yes.
Trying to say that all of the founding fathers were deists and or godless or whatever. They have all these different things, and they were not good people, and that's changing the history. So when you change a history, it's going to affect generations.
Yes. I grew up with a saying. My dad would say, if you change the history, you change the doctrine. Because once you change a person's identity, they understand the entire scriptures are history. The Book of Mormon is a history book. Yeah. It is a history book. Yes, and the Bible. They're history books from where we see this is how God works. This is how doctrine works. This is how principles work. If you change that history, then you're going to be changing the doctrine, and that is what we are saying. We saw that with our American history. They changed the history. Thomas Jefferson had an affair with Sally Hemings. George Washington was a deist. Benjamin Franklin was a womanizer. They changed the history, and then all of a sudden, our policies change. And all of a sudden,
the works that they did actually are not so inspired anymore. They're kind of questionable.
Right.
We need to improve or change them. And,
so
and we're more enlightened now than they were.
Right. And it's the same thing with our church history. So a lot of people are all like fired up on the politics side, and they're getting involved in that. And a lot of people don't know that the same thing is happening with our church history. In fact, some of the same people.
So go ahead and kind of hold that up again. This is
oh, yes.
Again, my copy
so this
here.
is book 2.
But this is book 2, and it's called...
Yes. Behind Closed Doors. So on the cover, we've got Leonard Arrington and Ezra Taft Benson. So Leonard Arrington was the church historian. He's known as the father of the new Mormon history. So
there's a new Mormon history.
There's a new Mormon history, just like there's a new American history and a new world history and all of that. So he is actually pretty much every progressive scholar today, pretty much every historian in the church even. They look to Leonard Arrington, and they literally almost worship him. If you start questioning Leonard Arrington, and they'll just come after you like he's Santa Claus or something. I don't know. So he's the giver of all good things. So Leonard Arrington, he was actually an economist. He grew up in a home where they believed in the Bible.
But Idaho.
Yeah. Yes, in Idaho. Big home, big family. And he'd only read the Book of Mormon and the Bible all the way through once when he was 13, and then he never read them through again. And
he might have referred to them or maybe read some things,
but not.
But that's actually his own statement, right?
Yes,
he's basically saying
that's actually his own statement. So, what happened was. Okay, before I get myself to the diaries. But so he grows up, he goes to college, he becomes converted to Darwinian evolution in college, starts progressing more towards liberal politics, things like that. And so then he ends up getting involved in history. And he actually feels that God called him to change Latter-day Saint history. He has several
epiphanies, basically, that he feels like are kind of almost like visions, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And so for Leonard Arrington, he's not thinking he's on the wrong side. He believes God has called me to save the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from bad history. Traditionalist history paints Joseph Smith in this beautiful light. He was a hero. The Book of Mormon is true. All of this. And he's like, that's not really true, accurate. We're going to tell a new history.
And when people find out that Joseph Smith was really kind of a little ne'er-do-well kind of thing, and he was not really this great guy that we've all held him up to be, then they felt like that there's going to be a huge crisis in the church, and people are going to leave the church in droves. So we need to kind of inoculate them by helping people to realize that Joseph Smith was kind of a little bit questionable character. And his family was kind of not really that great a family.
You use the term inoculate. So that is actually one of their terms. So they think like, okay, like our history is like this disease that we've got to be like vaccinated against. So that's this kind of perspective. So
vaccination being on all of our minds at the time.
Right. So he actually ends up becoming the church historian in 1972, and he
was the first church historian, as I understand it, who was not a member of the quorums, basically not a general authority.
Right. Well, you had like Joseph Fielding Smith before then, or Wilford Woodruff, George A. Smith, different people like that who had written our history. They're the ones that wrote the history of the church. They wrote Essentials in Church History, all these books. So Leonard Arrington comes on the stage and he's like, it's time to modernize our material. And we're going to do it just like the colleges do it. That we're going to secularize this. We're going to, instead of being like the church is true and Joseph Smith was a prophet, let's just kind of be neutral. Let's just kind of like play both sides. And so what he does is he starts training, and he goes on the search to find every budding scholar or author that he can find and train them in this new approach to church history, and then kind of motivate them and put the impetus behind them to be able to go and write a new history. This is where Richard Bushman came out of this movement. Pretty much all of the idea that Joseph Smith translated the seer stone and all of this new history you're hearing comes from this guy named Leonard Arrington. So Leonard Arrington was the church historian, and he kind of flies under the radar for a while. He realizes he's got to be careful, because if too many of the general authorities catch wind of what he's doing, he knows he's going to be fired.
And he's kind of among this, basically the hierarchy of the church, if you will, are kind of ultra-conservative. I mean, you have Joseph Fielding Smith and Ezra Taft Benson and Bruce R. McConkie, and some of these guys they're pretty darn conservative people. And there was a group of them. He started a group, and the name of that group was interesting.
Okay, so are you thinking of the Swearing Elders in the 1950s?
The Swearing Elders.
So there was, and that was started by Sterling McMurrin in the 1950s in Salt Lake, and that was kind of a group where it kind of pulled together academics from Utah State University and University of Utah and BYU. These members that were feeling disgruntled were kind of like, I don't buy the whole God created the earth thing, and I don't buy this whole angel shows up and gives Joseph Smith the plate story. How can we modernize Mormonism? How can we, move towards more progressive? So they would get together, and they actually called themselves the Swearing Elders. They thought it wasn't
really a secret group, but it was a group that there was by invitation only. So basically, scholars from these different universities here in Utah, they would all get together on specific nights and so forth, and then they would basically each, I guess, gave presentations and so forth about their particular views.
And they talk about different things. Sometimes they invited people. There's actually a story in here that I want to tell, since you brought up the Swearing Elders, from Hugh Nibley, because everybody knows Hugh Nibley, right?
Yeah.
So Hugh Nibley was actually invited once to speak to the Swearing Elders. So this was before he actually had a debate with Sterling McMurrin, the guy that was kind of like one of the co-founders.
Yeah.
And so before he had this debate, he was invited to go speak to a Swearing Elders meeting. And I'm just going to quote this. This is from Hugh Nibley's biography. And again, the full story, it's in our Behind Closed Doors. But he says, after giving his presentation, Hugh says they took him aside and told him, "You're among friends now. You can say what you really feel about the Book of Mormon." Hugh simply bore his testimony that the Book of Mormon is in fact a true record of an ancient people and that Joseph Smith was a prophet. Oh, they were mad, Hugh states. They were just boiling. He recalls one member of the group launching about how the Book of Mormon, how we have to get rid of it. It's driving the best minds out of the church. He said, "You can't see it, but with my training I know it. Joseph Smith was a deceiver, but he was a sly deceiver." Hugh was chilled by such reactions. He said they had a real active hatred of the Book of Mormon. These were, for the most part, members of the church in good standing. So Hugh Nibley goes home that night. His wife says he's visibly rattled. So it's what we're seeing is there was this growing movement of people that are like, we need to change the church. We don't like this.
Well, they actually said we need to take Joseph Smith down off of his pedestal.
That's what they say today. Top historians. So they're like, we gotta change this direction. Now it's interesting. What I love about this is everyone tries, well, not everyone, but the progressives, they try to paint like Joseph Fielding Smith and Harold B. Lee and these others are kind of like smash dissent, excommunicate, and there have been issues on both sides of people trying to censor discussion, but Joseph Fielding Smith actually knew about the Swearing Elders group, and he actually sat down and had a meet with Sterling McMurrin, kind of like to ask him, like, kind of explain to me where you're coming from. And this story is actually
it's in Faith Crisis.
Faith Crisis Volume 1. It's a good
It's amazing. I wish we had time to actually read
the
a portion of it, because
you can get the book.
Wow. I mean, he basically goes in and he said they were just dumbfounded. He said they asked me, so what's your opinion about Adam and Eve? He said, don't believe them.
Yep. Don't believe
it. Don't believe there was ever a flood. And he says, and if there's these things, if there was no creation, then there's no need for an atonement.
Yeah, first vision didn't really happen.
There was no need for an atonement. Basically, the guy essentially admits that he had almost zero testimony of any aspect of the gospel itself.
Right. And this is like not to rip on him, right?
Yeah.
This is his perspective.
Thoughts.
No, actually, so Sterling McMorrin was actually
he said they
really
were just dumbfounded.
Right. Yes.
the brethren they was having this meeting with at church headquarters were just dumbfounded.
But it's so interesting because he was asking Joseph Fielding Smith, like, "Are you going to shut me down?" And Joseph Fielding Smith said no. He said everyone has a right to say what they believe. Now, of course, Joseph Fielding Smith is hardcore traditionalist, right? So he's on the other side of this. Yeah. But he was like, you guys have a right to speak. I have a right to speak. Let's let all the sides speak. And that is something we do not have going on today.
I think that shows a confidence in your side, in your ability to explain and to defend your particular positions when you're willing to let the other side speak. Also, I think it shows a weakness in your side if you basically want to shut down all discussion, because that really shows that you don't really have a very good argument.
Yes, and we have a huge issue right now of them trying to shut down sides. So we were actually in a Facebook group run by Book of Mormon Central, and we talk about this. It's actually in the book, and we were. So someone started discussing the translation of the Book of Mormon, and someone shared our Seer Stone versus Urim and Thummim book. So a historian got on there that's a Mesoamerican and progressive scholar or author, I guess, to be accurate. Yeah. And he hops on there and he's like, "Don't read the book." So I hopped on there because I'm in the group. I was like, "Let's have a discussion then. Let's talk about it," you know? Yeah. And so I said, "Okay, so I'm curious, what do you not like about the book?" And it was funny because he came back and he said, "Well, I actually haven't read it, but I've just heard things about it."
I know it's not true.
I've heard things about it. So I was like, he was like, "I just bought a copy right now." So I was like, "Okay, great." He was like, "But I can tell, just the title, Seer Stone v. Urim and Thummim." So he started making some historical claims, and I was like, "Actually, that's not true. Here's the quotes and here's the sources." And then it went dead silent. Just silent. About an hour later, I was blocked from the group. All of my comments were deleted. I had a bunch of other friends that were in the group. So they started either leaving comments or watching what was going on and screenshotting. If anyone made a comment, not even referencing us, opposing the Seer Stone in a hat narrative or anything, just even saying like, "Hey, well, Joseph Smith said."
So their fact checkers basically fact checked you,
right.
and you were found to be on the wrong side of their facts.
Right. That's right. That's right. And so, I even know somebody who went in there and they were like, "I'm going to be really cool, and I'm just going to post like a Joseph Smith quote and say, 'Hey, Joseph Smith said he used the Urim and Thummim. Here's a quote.'" Bam, deleted, and blocked anyone who challenged the Seer Stone narrative. So this went through the night. People leaving comments, and their moderators from Book of Mormon Central were on there just bam, bam, bam. And then it was interesting because we had someone in the group who said, "Well, like we should be able to talk about this. Like, I'm reading Leonard Arrington's diaries. This is what this person said, and like what's going on, you know, and I don't think I agree with him." And they were told by one of the people at Book of Mormon Central, which I will not name, but I have it all documented. They said, "Well, if you don't like Leonard Arrington, you're not going to like this group." Leonard Arrington is this church historian that we're talking about here. That
they had no testimony and met with the brethren and actually admitted that he...
Right.
In his own words. I mean, he basically said, "This is what I told them."
Yes.
It's pretty... And it's really damning. I mean, it's like, whoa.
So once everything was censored from the group, then Book of Mormon Central went through, and then they just flooded the group with posts promoting the Seer Stone narrative, promoting Joseph Smith being involved in magic and treasure digging and all that stuff.
So they sent out their blanket email to all their friends that basically jump in there and write comments. Right,
but allowing no one to give an opposite side. And so this is kind of what was happening even in the 1970s and 1980s, is this movement behind closed doors, kind of like scholars saying, how do we change the history, and doing it in a way, and the members didn't know about it. So when Ezra Taft Benson started getting wind of it, he was like, No, like people either love Ezra Taft Benson or they hate him, right? But he was a person who stood for what he believed.
Well, many of these scholars actually really have a disdain for him.
Yeah, so when we were working on Behind Closed Doors, actually several books have come out just tearing Ezra Taft Benson apart, just trying to annihilate his character, annihilate everything about him. And it's like, he must have done something right. It was literally, people don't realize if I really believe if President Ezra Taft Benson had not stood for what he had stood for, and it's a story a lot of people don't even know, because it was all behind closed doors, and a lot of people don't know the sacrifices that he made and the stand that he took. And it wasn't just him. It was Gordon B. Hinckley. It was Boyd K. Packer. It was many others. Mm-hmm. They made this stand and they were fighting. And frankly, I believe it's why we even have a church today, because we were on the path of completely changing everything with Leonard Arrington and his scholars and others, and Ezra Taft Benson and Gordon B.
They
Hinckley.
literally wanted to Shanghai the church, basically, and its leadership, and move the church in a direction that wasn't one that was shared by the church leadership at the time. Right,
and they didn't believe that the church restored by Joseph Smith was it's kind of like the one true faith. They didn't believe that. They were like, well, it's how much different is it than anything else out there, right? And so what happened was Leonard Arrington kept copious diaries where he just recorded everything, conversations. I just talked to Ezra Taft Benson. I had this meeting with Spencer W. Kimball, like all this behind the scenes stuff that nobody knows about. And then he locked up his diaries and he said he didn't want them published.
At Utah State University, because he was a professor there for a time.
Yes.
And so they said these are not to be released for 25 or 20 years or something after his death.
And then it got negotiated down to 10 years. Kind of his kids were like, I think we can do this sooner than later. But it was interesting. So we actually have this at the beginning. We can't tell the whole story, but how like the diaries got leaked out. Yes. And somebody from the church actually went in there and read them before they were supposed to. And there was this whole legal battle. It's quite a crazy story. But eventually they got released to the public. And so we went through them and had a team go through them and everything. And so we wrote these books to tell people, like, okay, what is this story going on behind closed doors, and why does it matter? Well, it matters because it's the battle right now that we're waging, and our kids are the casualties right now. On, if you're a progressive or a traditionalist, you see this as a pivotal battle of our age, and it's really a battle for the restoration. So
yeah, it's a battle basically of do we believe in the things that Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and those who were there and the early brethren of the church actually claimed as was the history and so forth, realizing that they too may have had their particular biases, but they were also truth tellers.
And we can fact check things. Yeah. We can check things out. We can check it with data.
Historical documents and so forth. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So that's actually one of the fun things, but I'll mention that a little bit later. But.
Thank you for listening today. Enjoy these special scenes from one of the church's newest historical sites on the Susquehanna, where the priesthood restoration took place. There truly is a peaceful serenity that honors the very name of harmony here. There are several miraculous events around 2013 which allowed the church to finally take steps to restore and preserve this sacred land. The chapel doubles as a visitor center, and one can imagine all that Joseph and Emma experienced living almost next to the cemetery where they buried their firstborn son, little Alvin. We are also gearing up for the next Book of Mormon Virtual Expo. Go to bookofmormonevidence.org for more information.